At the beginning of the 20th century, there was nothing left in either France or Italy of the great romantic ballets, of which Giselle was the apogee. To find a living tradition of ballet, you had to turn to Russia. For more than 100 years, both imperial companies, the Bolshoi in Moscow and the Mariinsky in St. Petersburg, and their schools, had been under the personal protection of the Tsar. All the ballet masters appointed as directors were either French or Italian. The last of these was also the most important, Marius Petipa. Petipa was from Marseille, son of a family of artists, but first and foremost the child of romantic ballet. In less than 40 years, he had established a genuine Russian tradition which had produced many prima ballerinas. He developed the grand classical style of controlled emotion, a tradition which produced Sleeping Beauty, created in collaboration with Tchaikovsky. But in 1905, Petipa was 80. In spite of his innovations, he and his ballets remained in the 19th century. Audiences were hungry for something new and original, something more daring. Russia was industrializing rapidly and ready to become one of the great European powers. But changes in social and political structures lagged behind, and this provoked tensions which severely weakened the Tsarist regime. The artistic and intellectual climate had never been so dynamic. From the world of the ballet came Mikhail Fokine, a pupil of Petipa, but influenced by the writings of Tolstoy. He did not want ballet to be just a diversion for the aristocracy. He hated the conventions of academic ballet and sought a form of movement in which there was more life. The arrival of Isadora Duncan confirmed Fokine's instincts. Isadora was an American. She abandoned the ballet shoe and the classical disciplines. She drew her models from elsewhere, far away from the territories of academic dance, from the movement of the waves, the friezes of ancient Greece. Fokine, too, was fascinated by the ancient civilizations. However, while he sought to introduce more freedom into movement, he never rejected the classical tradition, and in Les Sylphides paid homage to the star of romantic ballet, Maria Taglioni. great importance to the design of sets and costumes in his works, Fokine collaborated with the painter Alexandre Benoit. Through him, he would later be introduced to the leading impresario of the age, Sergei Diaghilev. This young man was at the center of a group of artists fighting against the naturalism in vogue at the time. The new modernist trends were as exciting to this circle as their own native Russian traditions, which they wanted to uphold and introduce to the West. This would be Diaghilev's role. Diaghilev had already taken Russian art and music to Paris. He now returned with the dancers of the Imperial Ballet. No longer were the sets made out of cardboard, but they were real visual creations. No more full-length ballets, but short pieces, ballets with a punch as Fokine had imagined them. And Diaghilev presented his own Russian revolution, the Polovtsian dances. The dancers of the Mariinsky, galvanized by the creative strength of Fokine and Diaghilev, met with resounding success. Paris had nothing but praise for Tamara Karsavina, for Vaslav Nijinsky, and for Anna Pavlova, for whom Fokine had created the Dying Swan to the music of Saint-Saëns. Pavlova's talent was in adding the art of her soul to French elegance and Italian virtuosity. After year, the miracle was reproduced. Scheherazade, Firebird, Le Spectre de la Rose, and Petrushka, which gave final recognition to the music of Stravinsky. The natural language of Fokine was classical ballet, but this language was fed and invigorated by dialects drawn from folklore and everyday life. Inspiration for the final dance of Petrushka came from the coachmen of St. Petersburg, who would clap their hands, stamp their feet, and beat their chests to keep themselves warm outside their carriages in winter. Diaghilev had already revealed the revolutionary choreographic talents of Nijinsky. In the space of 2 years, 3 choreographic works would create an astonishing interlude in the history of ballet, and dance seemed to free itself from the constraints of music. First came L'après-midi d'enfant, where Nijinsky danced a body rooted to the ground, a dance without technical display, as if he wanted to give to the dance his soul, which mere virtuosity constantly seemed to overwhelm. In Jeu, Nijinsky choreographed movement from sport, contrary to the classical technique of which he was complete master. The scandal came with Le Sacre du Printemps, which the press dubbed Le Massacre du Printemps. Stravinsky's music, commissioned by Diaghilev, was impossible to choreograph classically. Nijinsky, powerfully influenced by the rhythmic dances of Jacques Dalcroze, worked with the weight of the dancers' bodies. He turned their feet inwards rather than using the traditional turnout. After 120 rehearsals, the first performance took place on the 10th of May, 1913. Diaghilev approved of the provisional government brought to power in February 1917, but in October the Bolsheviks rejected him. He would never return to Russia. From now on, he would move continually, from London to Venice, from Paris to Monte Carlo. After Diaghilev's last visit to Russia in 1913, he brought back a young Moscow dancer who would replace Nijinsky, from whom he had abruptly parted. 16-year-old Leonid Massin. Massin, a product of the Moscow school, did not possess the lyricism of Fokine, but had a theatricality which Diaghilev flattered and encouraged. They spent the 4 years of the war together. In Italy, they met the young futurist artists. In Spain, Massin saw La Argentina dancing and studied flamenco, which later inspired him to create the three-cornered hat. 1917, Parade successfully broke entirely new ground. The idea for this Cubist ballet came from a young man of many talents, Jean Cocteau, who went to Eric Satie for the music, to Massin for the choreography, and to Picasso for the design of the sets and costumes. Diaghilev was enraptured by the Cubist canvases of Picasso, who was to marry Olga Koklova, a young dancer from the company, on the set of Parade. There was an immediate understanding between the Russian and the Spaniard. Picasso's costumes, conceived of as personalities, became the principal protagonists of the performance. They were the comperes who tried to persuade the public to go to the performance. The performance was a complete scandal. That is to say, Paris loved it. Later, Debussy wrote to Diaghilev, "I want you to know of my joy in rediscovering the extraordinary beauty of the Ballet Russe. It seems like an old dream which is beginning again. And it is very tragic because too many horrors have turned our world upside down." In the forefront of Diaghilev's admirers was someone who would also support him financially, Coco Chanel. Chanel represented first and foremost a state of mind, the spirit of the age. Morals and habits were loosened. Chanel invented for a female body, freed of the corset, fluid and loose garments made out of jersey. Paris society was on parade. Paris could dance and show off their legs, provided they were beautiful. The Ballet Russe produced disciples. Notable among these were the Swedish ballet, founded in 1920 by Rolf de Marais. Their leading star was Jean Borlin, a dancer trained by Fokine. Just like the Ballet Russe, they risked a juxtaposition of form and a combination of different disciplines. Satie composed their last fireworks piece, Relâche. René Clair shot his second film, Entr'acte, with them, a surrealist fantasy where the poetry of movement was interwoven with the movement of the city streets. But Diaghilev remained the leading light of the international stage. Despite this, Massin left him. He left in 1921 to form his own company. Diaghilev brought in Bronislava Nijinsky's younger sister, to replace him. She shared with the impresario a keen awareness of the spirit of the age, a sensitivity to the times. Diaghilev had asked for a new libretto from Cocteau. "Surprise me, Jean," he said. Cocteau offered him Le Train Bleu, and Chanel designed the costumes. Diaghilev seemed indefatigable. He was at once a discoverer of talent and their essential link with the outside world. He drew Miro into his circle, and then Max Ernst. Diaghilev, a notorious scandal-maker, was outmaneuvered by the surrealists. Flirting with communism, they were spoil-sports at performances of the anti-Bolshevik Ballet Russe in the pay of the decadent bourgeoisie. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union saw the beginning of the repression which anticipated the Stalinist terror and led to large-scale emigration. Among these exiles were the poet Boris Koshno, the dancer Serge Liffard, and the choreographer George Balanchine. All were welcomed by Diaghilev into his company. In fact, Diaghilev had never broken links with the artistic potential of his country. He sought out the Russian painters Gabo and Pevsner for the stage design and the costumes for La Chatte. He commissioned Prokofiev to write the music for Pas d'Acier, a work on Soviet Russia in which he collaborated again with Massin. Nijinsky had already choreographed Nos, inspired by the constructivists, to a score by Stravinsky with set designs and costumes by Goncharova. But Diaghilev was becoming exhausted. In his notebook, Liffard wrote, "Dance is becoming alien to him. The discovery of a rare book matters more to him than the premiere of a new work. Our family is falling apart." In 1929, the entire program of the Ballet Russe was by Massin. It would be their last tour. On the 19th of August, 1929, Sergei Pavlovich Diaghilev died in Venice. His funeral was held in the cemetery on the island of San Michele. The Ballet Russe died with him. An era had come to an end. With the exception of Nijinsky, who was now insane, all who had once formed part of the Ballet Russe continued to work throughout the world. In France, Boris Kochno wrote down the scenarios of the ballets and acted as a consultant to several companies, and Serge Liffard, appointed head of the Paris Opera Ballet, would reinvigorate a company stultified by an academic discipline. Diaghilev used to say of the dancers Anna Pavlova and Olga Spasitseva that they made up two halves of an apple. Olga, he would say, was the half facing the sunlight. This half Liffard invited to Paris. Liffard had a definitive style, a balance between the daring breakthroughs of the Ballet Russe and the slightly stiff elegance of the Paris Opera. In the Diaghilev tradition, Liffard continued to work with painters and composers, but the dance was always supreme. For les phares, Picasso created the sets for the ballet Icar. At the same point in time, England was a country still deprived of a ballet tradition. Artists were invited from abroad, but performed in variety theatres. In between a circus act and a music hall number, sets had to be changed in minutes. In the most important of these theatres, the Alhambra, Diaghilev restaged Petitpas' ballet Sleeping Beauty in 1921. As Princess Aurora, Olga Spasitseva outshone even Carlotta Brianza, who created the role in St. Petersburg and who interpreted the role of Caraboss in this production. Leon Bakst redesigned the costumes and sets for the occasion. This amazing extravaganza ruined Diaghilev and gave British audiences a taste for the full-length narrative ballet as in Petitpas' time. It was two women, Marie Rambert and Ninette de Valois, both of whom had worked with the Ballet Russe, who were to launch the tradition of British ballet. They were on the fringe of the Bloomsbury group, which included D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf and her husband Leonard, Lydia Lopakova, a ballerina with Diaghilev, and her husband, the economist Maynard Keynes. Lopakova and her husband perpetuated the spirit of the Ballet Russe and brought together artists from different disciplines. They created the Camargo Society, where Marie Rambert met Ninette de Valois. Marie Rambert had assisted Nijinsky on The Rite of Spring. She formed a company, and one of their early successes was Facade, a performance to the music of William Walton and inspired by Edith Sitwell's poetry. Facade was choreographed by Frederick Ashton, whose talent Rambert was quick to spot and encourage. If Ashton owed his beginnings to Marie Rambert, it was under Ninette de Valois that he became a great classical choreographer. Very quickly, the paths of Marie Rambert and Ninette de Valois diverged. Rambert took to the unexplored territories of modern dance, and de Valois to the realms of the classical tradition. Ninette de Valois was first a dancer and then manager with Diaghilev. She created a company and a school, which eventually formed the Royal Ballet. Ashton retained from his teachers, Cicchetti and Massine, the art of the pantomime. He scoured musical comedy and the theatre for inspiration. His sharp humour would shake the cobwebs from one of the oldest ballets in the repertoire, La Fille Mal Gardée. The economic crisis of the 30s brought hardship to everyone. Nevertheless, Rambert and her company remained open to new trends. During the war, they kept working. Marie Rambert toured the company far from its home, and it appeared in factories and before the troops. Anthony Tudor had become her leading choreographer following the departure of Ashton in 1935. Tudor's works reflect the concerns of the Bloomsbury artists, the voyage into the interior self, explicit in the writings of Virginia Woolf. "1936 saw the outbreak of civil war in Spain. In Dark Elegies, Tudor portrayed the unspeakable suffering of a community who had lost their children, to the music of Mahler's Kindertotenlieder, songs of the death of children. Alongside the rise of ideologies, dictatorships were established. Dance could no more easily than any other art escape the convulsions which shook the world. One cannot dance to the sound of guns.
Tellement qu'il y avait peu de chance d'en ressortir qu'en passant le porche, nous avons chanté la Marseillaise pour nous donner du courage. Là, on nous a rasé la tête et on nous a tatoué sur l'avant-bras gauche le numéro matricule.
In the post-war climate, a horror-struck world uncovered the scale of the tragedy. At Yalta, the world was carved up. The Cold War followed. All the arts registered the shock of this history now become absurd, but the theatre of Beckett in particular proved a tireless reminder. In Paris, the post-war scene was of a disillusioned youth who danced in the bars of Saint-Germain-des-Prés to the trompinette of Villon. Existentialism, the hope of the hopeless, made itself a way of life. It formed an umbrella for anything new from both intellectual and artistic circles, from Albert Camus to Jean-Paul Sartre, from Juliette Greco to Miles Davis. Maurice Béjart was soaked in this atmosphere. Born in Marseille, son of a philosopher, he came to Paris in 1950.
Je voudrais des chocs pour de temps en temps réveiller les gens et qu'ils prennent conscience.
met a radio producer, Pierre Schaeffer, who was made famous by the Shaddocks. He and Pierre-Henri introduced Béjart to musique concrète. To ambient music composed by Pierre-Henri, he created Symphonie pour un homme seul. For the first time in classical ballet, a choreographer wrestled with his own history, portrayed his fears, and testified to his solitude.
Et maintenant, vous redescendez, voilà, là. Mais qu'on voit vos mains, là. Voilà, là.
Paris rejected Béjart and preferred Roland Petit, a pure product of the Paris Opera Ballet. Both took on the same themes, the anguish of the age, the painful quest for meaning, mankind face to face with death. But the public opted unreservedly for the more classical elegance of Petit. Petit surrounded himself with those who had once accompanied the Ballet Russe: Serge Liffard, Jean Cocteau, Boris Koshno, and the designer Natalia Goncharova. For his wife, Zizi Jeanmaire, he choreographed Carmen, which confirmed him as a master of narrative ballet. After the success of Carmen, Petit went to Hollywood, where he worked with Fred Astaire. On his return, he revealed another aspect of his art in the music hall numbers he created for Zizi. But it was Béjart who created the major event at the Universal Exhibition in Brussels with his explosive version of the Rite of Spring. Unlike his predecessors, Nijinsky and Massin, Béjart stripped the music of all narrative and reduced the work to a confrontation of the sexes. After existentialism came a second movement embracing humanitarianism and the brotherhood of man. The work of Béjart reflected the hedonism and the polemics of youth. His dance matched the social realities of the day. With decolonization and the birth of the new republics in full swing, Béjart made dance the symbol of humanity searching for its identity, an instrument of solidarity. It became a universal language. Dancers in his company came from all over the world, were of every race and creed, but were all trained in the classical tradition.
Pour moi, la base de la danse classique est indispensable pour acquérir la connaissance de son corps. Un bon danseur n'a jamais de difficulté à changer de style et de chorégraphe. Sur la gauche enveloppé. Non, non, sur la gauche enveloppé. Gauche enveloppé.
After each tour abroad, he integrated into his work the languages of ethnic dances and local traditions. From India, he brought back Bhakti, and from Iran, Golistan. Dance was finally able to break free from the closed circle of the regular opera house audiences. His performances filled stadiums as easily as football matches. His ballets were messes pour le temps présent, masses for the present time.
Je crois qu'il n'y a pas de créateurs à part entière. Je crois qu'on se sert tous les uns des autres. Je crois qu'on transpose tous, que chacun se sert, mange, dévore et transforme. On est un peu comme des cannibales qui dévorent leurs ancêtres.